Hello and welcome to the final session of today's program, Fireside Chat, with Ralph Gilles and me, James McLachlan, editor of CDN. Now, by way of introduction, although I'm not sure he needs it, Ralph is the Chief Design Officer for Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Maserati, and the Fiat Latin America brands, which all fall under the Stellantis umbrella. It's fair to say Ralph has enjoyed a rapid rise in the world of car design. He joined Chrysler in 1992 within the design office and was appointed Vice President of Interior Design for Jeep, truck and specialty vehicles in 2006. Among his best-known projects are the Chrysler 300 and the SRT Viper. I could go on, but it's probably quicker just to get him on the virtual stage. Welcome, Ralph. So sorry to keep you waiting. We had a minor technical hitch backstage, but we're here and live now. Just a reminder to everyone watching to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll try and put them to Ralph as we chat. I'm quite pleased with my own background, Ralph, but yours is much more spectacular. Could you? What are the vehicles behind us? Talk us through.
I guess it's my left. The Maserati MC20, which is launching in the U.S. as we speak. It launched a few months ago in Europe. The Chrysler Airflow concept, which was shown at its time a few weeks ago in Las Vegas. The 500e, which is our first fully electric car for Europe from the Fiat brand. We had one here, but this is like a dedicated vehicle for the European market. 500e is doing really well, actually. And the brand new Wagoneer, which also launched. So a lot of brand new cars. And the reason I show them is the variety, right? You got the Fiat right next to the Wagoneer. And then
yes. Yeah.
Maserati.
That's quite an enjoyable contrast there.
And
of course, and across the world as well. We're talking Europe.
Yeah.
Europe right through to the United States. I mean, you are, head of multiple brands, and it's a huge company. But I suppose we'll get to some of that a bit later, and electrification as well. I wondered though if we could start a little bit by going back in time and talking about role models. You've spoken over the years about the importance of your close family in your development of your career and encouraging you at the start. But I wanted to ask you about Tom Gale. You've mentioned him as a mentor in the past, and I wondered if you could share a little bit about what you learned from him.
So if people don't know who Tom Gale was, he was for a long time the head of design himself for the company, but he was a fascinating person in the way that he had an engineering degree, a business degree, and a design degree. So he was really a triple threat in a way. And he could. I observed him handling engineers like no designer could ever, because he knew their subject better than they did in most cases. And he was the father of 20-inch wheel on the Ram truck, which set the market alight. I mean, it was those kind of things. He would go to battle and get proportions, a cab forward proportions. So I would say for the first 8 years of my career, I just observed him. I just watched him in action. And then once he moved on, actually right around his retirement, I reached out to him and say, hey, could you mentor me? You've been through a lot. And we've had fantastic dinners and discussions. Fascinating man. I learned a lot about what not to do and what hopefully we
do. What not to do. Could you give me a specific example? I mean, I think that's almost as important as what to do.
Yeah, I think never accept the status quo every single time. I mean, try to kind of always, no matter what the brief may be, as a designer, you're allowed to offer a counter brief, a different theme maybe that's further reaching, or a different, because the people that write briefs tend to look left and right. They look at the current market and do some today benchmarking, whereas designers, we're visualizers, right? We can imagine maybe 10 years into the future, sometimes further than that. So especially if you have the right adult beverage around. So he was very good about pushing that factor. He loved the idea of concepts. He spoke through concepts. I mean, we had an amazing era, I would say, from the mid-90s, even before that, because the Viper concept is what got me interested in the company in the first place. Back in '89, I saw the Viper show car, and then the Portofino, and it was an onslaught of concepts, and he was really good at kind of guiding the company's path. And then we'd show those cars at Pebble Beach and all the big shows, and it would keep that conversation going about the company. So it was very, very cool. And on top of that, I would say what not to do is maybe the infighting. Tom had a way of solving problems behind the scenes, so I really have been trying to work on that, connecting with executives, kind of, because it's not something you naturally want to do. Typically, you go home and you have a coffee or something, you just relax. Whereas in the case of business, it never stops. You have to do some homework. You got to do some outreach and kind of pave the way. And sometimes let's say we end the meeting fighting. 2 days later, everything is resolved. And everyone's like, how that happened? They don't know that I've had meetings behind the scenes. So that was one of the great lessons from Tom Gale.
That's interesting. That's almost like the kind of, I don't know if it's a particular an analogy that you leap at or fully embrace, but it is the sort of that horse trading behind the scenes has got a smack of the way things work, perhaps in Washington or something like that. A little deal off the side, kind of.
You call it Nimiwashi, I believe. It's kind of like the meeting after the meeting kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. And you mentioned here he had sort of multiple backgrounds, and this is something you are pretty well schooled in various different ways as well. So this is something you kind of have
I would say I have a default in engineering. I mean, because I race cars, I've always raced cars. I've tinkered a long time. I was quite poor for a long time, so I had no choice but to service my own vehicles. So I learned a lot about vehicle packaging, suspension. I've built several engines for my old Alphas, my old Volkswagens, and even some Mopars, neon Mopars. But also the business degree. That was more of a promise to my father. I thought, hey, I'd go. He didn't really understand the art degree. He was concerned that is that enough, for an immigrant child to go to the U.S. and get an art degree. So I went back and I did get my business degree in 2002. And some of my designers have done the same. A few of the guys that work for me have gone back to school. And so there's an argument. Does it pollute your mind as a creative, or I think it opens my mind. It allows me to do kung fu with the finance guys.
Yeah. So at least you feel like you're trading punches on a sort of level-ish playing field. You've conjured quite an interesting, alluring image there, I'd say, of Ralph Gilles tinkering in his shed with bits of oily rags surrounding him and things like that. Was the sort of automotive culture in the United States as a child of immigrants something that you really embraced from a very young age?
Well, I grew up in Montreal, and there was a bit of a car culture and very small, front-wheel drive cars. The Honda Civics were popular, the Volkswagens, but I didn't have any money back then. So, started my job. As soon as I got my first paycheck, I went out and found a Scirocco. I'd always loved the Scirocco S from Giugiaro, one of my favorite designers. And of course, it was a very old 25-year-old car, so it needed some work, right? So I learned a lot. I got the manuals. And I'm working in the parking lot of my college. I remember even starting then, and I got my house, and I dedicated a spot to just working on cars. And I got into autocrossing. I almost lost my license driving a little too quickly on public roads. So one of my coworkers said, "You should go racing or something." So I started doing that, and I really got to go quite deep in that. It's a great relaxing. Now I do it when I have time. I don't, I just go at night and tinker for a few hours in the shed, so to speak.
The Scirocco, it's a car. It's a beautiful design. It's the first car I remember my father owning, and he had to sell it when I turned up because he couldn't get my carry in the back, which was I still think he's quite annoyed about that fact. Just talking about your own career though, from this tinkerer and then sort of now where you are as the chief design officer. There are a lot of great designers out there, but not all of them have kind of climbed quite as high as you have. And I wondered what you thought. It's quite hard, I know, to sort of self-analyze, but what was different about you that meant you could occupy this kind of slightly higher echelon?
I think and some people look at me with curiosity that I've been at this company for 30 years, almost going on 30 years in July, which is very unusual. I mean, when I hire young designers, they almost fall off their chair when they say, "How long have you been here?" I say 30 years, like they can't get their heads around it, because most people today are somewhere 5 years, 3 years, and some 10. But I would argue that the company's changed around me. I'm on CEO number 9, and it has completely changed. Today we're 3 different conglomerates. We're a big conglomerate made up of 3 distinct countries companies from 3 different countries, and almost 4 in a way if you count Germany, France, Italy, and the U.S., and actually Latin America and China. So the world has changed around me in a way. So by me sticking around in a way, I sort of kind of kept climbing, I guess, And I because of that, I've got an immense amount of connection inside the company, which I can't. And I'm not a big believer in power for power's sake necessarily, but knowing who to call when you need something really goes a long way. So I was able to be quite effective quite quickly, and also knew what to believe and not to believe, because people that would pass by and shepherd the brands didn't necessarily have the same connection with the brands. So being, let's say, a steady part of the system, I could see the brands go and help them, nurture them, and create brand shepherds among us designers. So we actually had the studios broken up that way. So when I go to Jeep, I take off my Dodge hat and I'm in Jeep land and really embody. So I don't know exactly the formula. Someday I'll figure it out, but I love what I do, and I think that comes through. So it's not really a job per se. It's a mission.
Yeah, well, I mean that's very emotive way of describing it, Ralph. But I guess that is being involved in the same company for 30 years, but you've obviously still maintained a real passion for all of this. I mean, how do you stay motivated in that way? You get dragged into another board meeting and oh God almighty.
I love that question because you're right. Being in the company, I still am on the executive board now for 13 years. So I've been drawn to board meetings in London many times, in Netherlands. And those are heavy meetings. They're finance based, they're acquisitions. But what I do is I walk amongst the enthusiasts. So I love to go to Cars and Coffees, to car shows, to Radwood, you name it. And most of the time, people have no idea who I am. I got my hoodie on, I'm blending in. I bring my 205 Peugeot or my old Alfa Romeo, and I just park it there, and we have conversations. And that's the great equalizer. They don't care that I'm a head of design, or I don't care if this guy has built this car in his father's backyard. We just talk shop, and I'm as fascinated by a homemade heap as I am by a scissor-doored supercar.
Yeah.
Or a butterfly.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Enthused. It reminds me that there's a point of passion still. There's people that create communities around the car, and part of our job as designers to keep that flame going, let's say.
No, absolutely. And I think cars just inspire kind of enthusiasm and loyalty, like few other objects actually, and people will pore over performance figures and stats and wheelbase lengths and things like that. But you are that by the sounds of things. So it's not a great leap to sort of converse with various levels of the business.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's something I think that disarming, I try to come at it from a disarming perspective. You get so much more out of people. You really understand what they really want to do, what they don't want to do. And you actually put let's say the guard comes down and we really talk about what our objectives are.
Moving on slightly, but I suppose a related point, you've been a very strong advocate of diversity within the automotive world, not just in design, but just in general. And I wondered if you could unpack a little bit about what that can bring to a company.
Yeah, so I've been head of our resource group, our business resource group, which is the African American diaspora inside the company for well over 10 years now. And what I found is, number one, it gives a friendly environment for when we do onboard. We are successful at recruiting people of color, but we had a situation where they wouldn't stay very long because they felt a little bit like they were lost in the company. It wasn't a question of acceptance; it was more just lost. It was a big difference from coming from an all-black college or something like that and landing in a corporation that isn't quite reflecting society just yet. So number one is understanding them, giving them a safe haven, listening to their needs, giving them a bit of a career path advice, connecting them with executives. But what's fascinating, the last couple of years actually, since the Black Lives Matter movement and all that, we've been able to use that resource to connect with our leadership. So our leadership has actually dove in and had coffee chats like we're having now, but with the extended leadership of our resource group. And that is just advance the cause. Because of that, we actually have a D&I office now that we didn't have, and the head of the D&I office, Lottie Robinson, came from our group. So it's exactly what I hoped would happen.
Yeah, it's about setting that kind of ecosystem and just setting the sort of triggers to go, and then it evolves. I presume of its own accord.
Yeah.
I wondered how, since you joined Chrysler in 1992, on that note, have you seen significant change? I know you're doing a lot yourself, and you were talking about this, but yeah. What has has there been significant change, or are
absolutely? We're so different on so many levels. I think the companies, let's be honest, the Chrysler company had a boom and bust type of dynamic for years. Do quite well, and it would rest on its laurels per se. The last crisis was around, we had late 90s, and we had another one in the 2000s and 2008. So we had three kind of crises. And since, I would say, number one, the mission was to fix the fundamental cars themselves, get our interiors to a level of irreproachability, get the designs to be appealing, have the brands stand for something. So we've really divided the brands into really meaningful. The Jeep brand went from about 300,000 units a year to 1.7 million a year around the world. It's a global brand now. It was really an American brand that was casually exported here and there. Now we have 5 different plants for the Jeep Compass, for example. So that's been, we're much more international now. I think our quality of our vehicles is well out there. We actually won quality awards in the US, #1 for Ram and et cetera. So we made great strides there. And now that the house is in order, let's say, we're financially very, very stable compared to where we were years ago. We can actually really start pushing and investing in the future. We're building up battery plants. We're going to announce some great news in a couple of weeks here. So big moves are happening. And by joining with Stellantis, we've kind of curtailed some learnings in some areas that we were probably weak. And at the same time, our scale now allows us to afford much better pricing, so we can really get the cars to the people. It's one thing to make a $200,000 car, but it's another thing to try to create meaningful vehicles for the masses.
Meaningful vehicles for the masses is a really important point. I think the car was the great liberator. It was the object that changed the 20th century and progress. With something like Jeep as well, it's as you mentioned there, a kind of global product, but this is a very American product as well. So American automotive design, it still has this capacity to sort of move hearts and minds in certain parts of the world.
Absolutely. The last thing we want to do is be a commodity car maker. That's just not our game. There's plenty of car companies out there if they want to do that. We're focused on really staying true to what Jeep is, but at the same time adapting. We're not just exporting the exact same American product. We have some brand new products coming out next year for Jeep that are dedicated to the European market. The Renegade and Compass would not have existed had it not been for our connection with Fiat. They saw a need. They said there's a gap, and Jeep has filled that gap beautifully. So work in progress in Latin America. Jeep is nearly number one in its segment. We have a plant in Pernambuco, Brazil. Again, that didn't exist 7-8 years ago. So a lot of interesting things have happened, created great jobs. I mean, the plant in Brazil is in the middle of a sugarcane field, and took people that are in third world level poverty are now living in homes and going to school and have their own hospital that we helped build. So a lot of neat things have been happening around the world.
Yeah, it's encouraging to hear these kind of stories. Stellantis as a group, I mean, you guys are facing the same challenge that all the OEMs and companies are facing, I suppose, and that's this move to electrification. And I wondered how, it's talking, I suppose, specifically about the United States, because I think, well, obviously we have that as a theme for the event, but how the design strategy across multiple brands is going to help sell this idea of electrification to the American public, because they're not given the sort of the car culture. I mean, I think you can imagine the perfect soundtrack to the American dream is probably the burble of a V8. But beyond the sort of coastal areas, I wondered how your design will sort of.
Well, that's a very poignant point, actually. We know today, as we stand, electrification, the market is only at about a 3% take rate. We predict, though, by 2025, that number is going to change, and by the late 2020s, it'll be closer to 40%, somewhere around there. A lot of people are hedging either way. Regardless what it is, we have to be tastemakers. I do think we're not necessarily rushing the market right now. We're actually studying the market very carefully. We're developing as we speak. I'm working on more than 7, just stateside. We have well over that globally. Just this year alone, we're developing 7 electrified vehicles simultaneously. Reason we're doing it together because we're working on a new platform called Stella Large, which has been in the news. It's an outstanding platform, and we're having a field day. Actually, if you could see what's on that side of the camera, you would see 3 proposals that I'm about to show the CEO tomorrow. So very exciting. So I believe that if we come with the right cocktail, because today the most desirable electric cars tend to be very, very expensive and out of the reach of the average person. So once again, we're not listening to the noise. We're really focused on creating real cars that people can afford, that have phenomenal range. They don't give up anything. And once the consumer tastes it, the average consumer, a lot of people buy. I love the Tesla. To me, it would be a third car or even a second car. For the average need of someone needing a car to go see their in-laws or travel cross country at an affordable price, that's a puzzle we love to solve. So the problem-solving aspect is well upon us, but trying to make them, again, succinct for every brand and desirable from the get-go. Not an excuse. I'm not buying it because I have to or I'm told to. I'm buying it because I want to. And that's what we're focused on. So we'll be right there. In a few years' time, we'll have many, many choices. And people will be able to choose. I think once the infrastructure is there, you'll see the acceptance rate go. I think in quantum leaps.
You've touched on multiple things there, Ralph, and I wondered with the electrification thing. Actually, no. Going back, I suppose, to what you've spoken about there, these opportunities, and I wondered, designers at this juncture have you can argue they've never had greater responsibility.
Yeah.
But I do wonder at the same time, and this is a dual question, whether they're wielding enough power to kind of make an effective change. And I wonder what your take was there, because you are a designer who is high up, is on the board. So I kind of a rarity in that.
Well, let's put it this way. Two things happen. Obviously, we have all been through COVID, right? And the company's changed a lot, but the design office never closed. We've been open and finding a way to operate at full breakneck speeds, preparing for the future. And I've never hosted more finance people, engineering, CEOs, even board members have come to the office investigating the future with us, understanding it, because we're the visualizers of the future, and they're loving what they see. So yes, I think design has been elevated to a point where we have to really be careful which path we take, because you have vehicle demand energy now that can affect range. One style versus another can affect the range by 30 to 40 miles. When it's a gas powered car, you don't really think about that quite as much, but when it's electric, it could be a deal breaker. So we're considering aerodynamics, but also we don't want every car to look exactly the same. Like, if you listen to the wind tunnel, the cars would look freakishly similar if they all had to achieve the same range and fit 5 people and all that. So that's the challenge now. On top of that, you factor in the 14 brands that Stellantis is part of, and we have to be super careful we're not competing with ourselves at the same time creating delicious choices for an emerging consumer.
I mean, I think that really is an interesting point, because as you say, a kind of a sort of flared wheel arch could sort of impact on whether you reach the next town or not. But I think you've spoken in the past about sort of protecting sort of brand identity and brand protection, and these two all things sort of feed in together. Is the answer in terms of exterior styling a question of porosity rather than kind of aerodynamics, if you know what I mean? Just getting air through the car with cleverly disguising sort of exterior.
Typically we do that for cooling or performance for aerodynamics, and we will be using that idea on certain vehicles. The Maserati behind me actually has no external wings. All the downforce is achieved through or under the car, and so we understand that. And it depends on the aesthetics, but typically external aero or some kind of catching the air is not a good idea. You really want I liken it, unless you're a fish, you need to breathe the water. It's like air. Better to manage the air around the vehicle as elegantly as possible. And that's we're spending, the amount of man hours in the wind tunnel these days, or using computational dynamics. We're putting designs that are literally a few weeks old into the virtual wind tunnel right away, because I want to educate our designers on what it means, because we could go down the rabbit hole and realize, oh my goodness, that design is costing us 80 kilometers in range. So that might get killed just for that reason. So it's a very fun, it's a great time. It's no different than Formula One and what they have to do to make a car fast. It's the same idea. We're getting into the microns and details. So
I guess as ranges and battery range increase, that will afford you greater freedom. But I suspect you would say we're in a transitional stage at the moment. And
we're looking at a little differently. I think today, to get the ranges that you need, the batteries are quite heavy. They're quite large. They're much heavier than a traditional car. We're hoping as the technology, and we already know that there is definitely a glide path, that weight will come out, but the range will remain. So getting the weight back down is always going to help everything. So that's something that we're looking at. But fundamentally, the size of the vehicle typically wants to be a certain scale, as humans are not changing anytime soon in their proportions. But there's many other forces at play here. We're looking at concerns in sustainability, how we process the vehicles, how much content we put in them. If you think about an electric car, it could have a much longer duty cycle. It could survive, 2 decades easily, right? So something quite different.
That was a question I wanted to put to you, because I feel from outside the automotive industry, electrification is seen as sort of a silver bullet for the sort of sustainability or environmental challenges we face, but probably not so. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Are we in a kind of middle stage before we move to something else in terms of powertrains, or maybe speculate?
I think that a lot of people don't realize how much our industry considers that. We do debate it. incredibly for hours and hours with our leadership. We talk about that all the time. The silver bullet factor, right? The electrification is nearly mandated in a way, and we embrace it because anybody who's driven an electric car, it's exhilarating. It really does have great torque demand, and there's a lot you can do with that, the way that power is delivered and how it's processed. But it's not without a cost, not without a price. I mean, the rule of thumb is it takes 100,000 kilometers before an electric car is more efficient than a gas car in terms of total demand on the footprint, right? So that's something we have to think about, and there's other ways. That's why our battery plants are trying to be constructed as close to our plants as possible, so that just you don't have to ship the battery around the world. This is how can the battery be recycled? How can it be removed? What kind of materials do you put in the car? Can you upcycle as much of the materials that are being sourced? So we are actually educating our designers on that. We have an entire team that looks at that, a think tank in Brazil and also in Europe, that we're getting all that information, piping it into our designers, and we're working on a project as well into the future. I can't talk about it, but we are doing exactly that. We're modeling the total ecosystem of the vehicle itself, and maybe in the future we can create a vehicle that is purposely for sharing, but it's not sharing as an ugly pod. It's actually something you want to share. I mean, homes are that way. We all share an aircraft to go across the ocean, right?
Yes.
So there's certain things that we may have to get used to, and they'll still be private use vehicles. They'll still be classics, but I think there's going to have to be a balance, of course.
You've just reminded me that I wanted to ask you to turn your camera around to show the concepts there. I don't suppose you're about to do that for a moment. You mentioned Europe there as well, actually, Ralph, and I wondered, and of course you've got the Fiat 5 behind you and the Maserati, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with Jean-Pierre Plouet, who's kind of your opposite number on the. I mean, and you both speak French, I imagine. So so. How are you guys on the phone constantly, or Zoom calls to each other?
We constantly are on WeChat all the time, or WhatsApp, whatever. We do have a monthly standing meeting, but also chat whenever we need to, and we share data immediately. I've been over there now twice, I believe. I've been to Europe to see him twice. He's been here at least one time, and we're going to plan, as COVID relaxes, we're going to be planning much more regular exchanges as we go forward. But when we shook hands, let's say when the companies became one company back, I think January now, we pretty much had to divide it because it was just too much workload. So he took over Alfa Romeo for myself. He took over Fiat Europe and Lancia, and I retained Maserati because the market is a little closer. America is one of the Maserati's biggest markets, so it made sense. Yeah. We get along great. He's a fantastic designer, passionate. We have great discussions about, the French style is different than the American style. But I've actually we had a wonderful forum in the summertime where we had about 50 of their designers and ours trade secrets and show each other what we're working on. It was amazing. It was such an enriching experience. It's something that we'd always wonder what they're doing behind the curtain. Now the curtain's open, so it's been fun.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall in that meeting, well, with my iPhone camera and my recorder.
I slept like a baby that night. I was so overstimulated. It was.
Yes, I can imagine you were. I've got there's a few questions coming in from the audience, so I'd like to throw out to you. This is I'm sure this is a universal question, but we always get. But what advice do you have for students looking to make their work and portfolios stand out?
Wow.
What did you do?
I was looking at what wasn't being done. When I graduated from CCS, I had an interior thesis. At the time, everybody had the spaceship cars and the really, really radical proportioned supercars, and I came with an interior of a city car. So I would maybe observe the class, and unfortunately or fortunately, sometimes there's group projects and the cars are quite similar. And I'm always looking for someone who went the extra mile. Maybe they had a self-starting project where they challenged themselves and did a small, let's say self-motivated project to show their other side of their thinking, just so there's a balance in their portfolio. Number two, extracurricular activities are always interesting. Is there something they do on the side that's compelling, related? Doesn't have to be related to design necessarily, but just to show gumption, because once you get in a company, you could be asked to do all kinds of neat things that have nothing to do with design. So does a person have the aptitude to help? Are they a team player? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, it's the personality. I'm actually, unfortunately, when you review portfolios online, it's a bit difficult, but in the face-to-face interviews, we're looking for energy. We're looking for basically the team dynamic and the person fit and is going to be a great contributor from day one.
Another question from the audience here. I would like to know if you have a studio team looking into different mobility designs for the future.
Yes, we do. We have an advance. It was somewhat dormant a little bit for a few years. We just reestablished a brand new advance. We had a place in California many years ago. We have one. Basically, every studio I've now challenged to. We have a kind of a virtual advanced studio that is connected with Jean-Pierre's team in Villézy, France. So yes, we do. We're looking at well over 10 years actually into the future. And now what's important is we're combining with our think tank team, which are really analysts that look at societal trends. They look at government mandates and rules and environmental trends. All that stuff is being kind of bombarded with us to a good way. And then we're solving with potential designs that you never may see them. They may never hit the light of day, but it forces us to think much differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one, actually, from the audience. How involved are you and your design teams with manufacturing plants around the world? Do you visit them? Engineers get feedback from production. What about designers?
I personally have visited just about every other plant. You know, I've really made it a point to go see the local plants here in Detroit. I've been to several times, but I have been to the plants in Italy and a few of the plants in China and the one in Brazil, like I told you before. It's not, unfortunately, as regular. Years ago, I had my team spend a day building trucks at Warren Truck. It was life altering for them. They got to respect what it takes and understanding how a design can make it difficult to make a car. And today, what is happening is we're looking at what we call transformation costs. That's non-value added costs it takes to put a car together. If it's more difficult, so we have to be conscious of that, and we have targets now that we didn't really have before. That's something that PSA brought to the party.
Yeah, it's interesting to share those ideas. There's another question sort of picking up a little bit on that point. We're talking about making EV affordable and capable for the average buyer, but what about the cost of sustainability? Will designing an eco-friendly car result in trade-offs in other areas?
That's a very good question. So today, especially when you look at premium automobiles, there's a lot of content, right? There's you have a substrate, then you have a foam padding, then you have some kind of a wrapping material. That's three materials to create one module. So that's something we're looking at. Can we restrike that discussion and reinvent what luxury is and what premium is through as our materials, with no coating on them. They come out of tool. Now, some of that is on our end. We have to convince our testing team to allow aging. Today, one of the problems is a car has to survive such a wicked environment. I mean, we test cars at 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the same minus 40 degrees. So, many other crazy tests that you can't even imagine. And a lot of the sustainable materials would just never survive that. So some of it is maybe changing the bar or explaining to the consumer that a sustainable material may behave differently. It may weather, it may look different. So there's something we're looking at and trying to rethink. Simplicity, obviously, less componentry helps. Upcycling, like I said, how the car is made, and then maybe promoting sharing with our new infotainment design. Perhaps sharing a car won't feel so austere. You jump in a car and the infotainment knows it's you. So in that time that you share the car, it feels like your own car. So that's something when we can maybe help solve the proliferation of the automobile in certain areas where it doesn't make sense by really amping up connectivity to help car sharing feel more natural. So there's many avenues there. We've looked in the past at paintless. We actually had a car that was paintless as a concept years ago.
Yeah.
We've had all kinds of ideas like that. So it's trying to do it in a way that is still profitable, but at the same time leaves a much smaller footprint. And in some cases, we just have to do carbon capture, and we are already planting trees, and we're looking at zero waste plants. It's not just the car itself; it's everything that goes into it.
Absolutely. We're ripping through a lot of stuff here, Ralph, and we're starting I think we're approaching the end of the session that we have with you. I know we started a little bit late. I had a question though, and it's a kind of general question I tend to throw out. But is there a car that you wish you'd designed? When you look back at the ones, you're like, God, I wish. You're probably going to say something that was long before you were even walking around. But
I will tell you two designers I'm quite fond of and jealous of at the same time. It's Frank Stevenson. I think he has done some amazing work. He's hopscotched through different companies and left his mark and really done amazing things with design. He's going to be one of those names that we talk about for years. And then there's Flavio Manzoni at Ferrari, who's just on fire these days. The SP series cars are just stunning. So when I look at Ferrari, and I know we own Ferrari in a way, it's part of the holdings of Exor, the family that co-owns Stellantis. So it's right there. I've been to the studios. I've seen the beautiful work that Ferrari does. So man, if I could ever, just spend a day with Flavio. But yeah, there's just amazing stuff going on. And I look at my predecessor, Mr. Ramaciotti, phenomenal designer. Right till his retirement, he was still making beautiful the Levante Maseratis, the Giulia, a little more classically designed, but stunning. Timeless vehicles that he had. So I take it all in stride. Even Peter Schreier, probably a great competitor of ours, but he's done great things with design, and it goes on and on. So I respect the community out there, and I don't know if any of them are watching, but I really love how industrial design has raised its game. Even when I visit Asia, I'm blown away by how quickly they are now doing their own thing. Let's say the schools are better. The design schools have really gotten into a groove. They're graduating great students. We're hiring students right from Chinese design schools. So it's great to see that for a while they were importing Americans and Europeans to help them. They really have turned the corner and are starting to create a unique Chinese styling, and that's what I kind of like about the era we live in now. They have the French cars are distinct, the American ones are. So there's a really cool flavor coming through in design in the automobile. So it's exciting times. At the same time, you can still drive around in a restored Alpha if you want to. So
yes.
These are the golden years in some ways. Yeah.
As long as you're signed up to AAA or the RAC, I think. Joking aside, Ralph, you mentioned Frank Stevenson there will be remembered as one of the great designers. I guess it was probably young in your career to speculate about how you'll be remembered, but how would you like to be viewed? I think as a kind of
that's it's one survivor. I think maybe I would be called the survivor, the cockroach of the industry. I don't know. No, but I hope that because you have to really put in perspective. I've been in this company at its worst of times when it was on its back, let's say, legs up in the air, almost done. Literally, we were so close to extinction. And to see, and we're not taking credit for it, but to see the power of design. We should never forget how powerful design is. And it could be a product company or an architect or whatever, but design can save companies. It can change culture. It can set trends. It can make brands ever more, right? So that's something I think about as a designer that, yes, the cars will come and go, but the brands tend to survive. They tend to live long lives. I mean, the Chrysler brand's 100 years old. Alpha's 70 plus years old. Jeep is 85 something. So we're dealing with some pretty important things here. So, and it's sad when you go into museums and you see brands that died in the 30s and 40s, and you look at the ones that are surviving today. It's like, it's a choice, really, right? You can let brands die, or you can will them forward with powerful design. So my job, at least now, is to try to make every brand relevant, and I hope people remember me as having breathed some life into these fantastic legacy brands as we embrace the future. So legacy could be a good thing if you can pivot and adapt to the current times.
Great stuff. Okay, well, I think that's a pretty good note to end on, isn't it, Ralph? Thank you so much for joining us on Car Design Dialogues. Really appreciate it, and we hope to see you soon.
Out there, please, anyone studying, good luck. I think there's always going to be demand for your skills, so keep pushing, and look forward to hiring some of you someday.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ralph. See you soon.